Have you ever opened a drawer you thought you knew the contents of and found a thing so small, a folded photo, a ribbon, a note, that it rearranged the room inside your head? That's what happened to me one rainy afternoon in late October, when the attic smelled of dry cardboard and the house let out a long, patient sigh. My name is Agnes Middleton. I'm 78, born and bred in a town that maps itself around the old grain elevator and the diner that never quite closed. I've lived in the same two-story since the 70s. I keep things. I like things that remember me. People ask why I don't move to something smaller. They say it's easier in a ranch, fewer stairs. I tell them I like my stairs. They're honest. They tell you when you're getting older. That day, I was clearing out the cedar chest my sister had left me. It's one of those chores that accumulates. A drawer of scarves that never get worn. Letters I mean to read and then don't. Boxes with careful labels whose ink has faded. A stack of albums was on top. I pulled one out, the leather cracked, the corners soft from years of hands. The pictures inside weren't only of weddings and holidays. There were Polaroids where the colors had blurred at the edges, school pictures with hairdos from another decade, a black and white where I'm wearing my mother's coat and my father is holding a fishing pole and smiling in a way men did when they wanted to look untroubled. At the back of that album, pushed between pages, there was a photograph that felt like a stitch out of place. It was of 3 children on a summer lawn, me at 8, a boy in overalls grinning with a missing front tooth, and a little girl with a bobbed fringe I did not recognize. She looked like she belonged with us, same nose as my mother, same curve of lip as my father, and there was a date written on the back, August 1956. Beneath the date, in my mother's cramped script, someone had written, "For the child we couldn't keep. Love always." I turned it over 3 times. Felt the paper's edge, felt my throat tighten for a reason that was not only the photograph. My father had died when I was 12. My parents had been poor, steady, decent, people who gave what they could and tucked the rest away in small jars for rainy days. I had never known of any child they couldn't keep. I had never known of anyone in our house signing her with just, "M.I. put the picture on the kitchen table like you might place a delicate dish." I set the kettle on, the small rituals help the brain move, and I called Daniel. "Hi, Mom," he said. He's in his 40s, teaches at the community college, keeps his life in lists and emails. He's practical in that soft way some men are if you're lucky. "Everything okay?" "I found something in the attic," I said. "Do you have a minute?" He did. He came by on his lunch break, held the photograph between his fingers, and let out a slow breath. That looks like you," he said. "Timing's August 1956. Mom's handwriting?" He turned the photo over as if the back might whisper. "It looks like her," I said. I had the odd sensation of being both the person who had seen the picture and also a woman from the photograph, looking back at a younger self. "Do you remember anything? Any talk of—" He shook his head. "Not that I ever heard. If Mom had a sister or a child, I would have known. She talked about my grandfather, Aunt Beatrice Bible study. This is new. We both did the obvious thing then. We called Mr. Harris. Arthur Harris is a name people in town respect. He's been the same suit for 30 years, has a steady way of reading paper, and knows where to find things in county offices. He came by that afternoon, coffee in hand, and sat at my kitchen table like a man ready to figure out a puzzle. He looked at the photograph and read the back, his fingers folding the corner of the paper like someone who understands value. "Could be a foster child," he said. "Could be an informal arrangement. In the 50s, families made choices they didn't always record in official ways. Or it could be an adoption. Records are a patchwork, Agnes. Some are right here in the county clerk's vault. Some were handled out of state. Some are sealed. You don't know until you start to look." "How do you look?" I asked. Not because I wanted a legal lecture, though I got one, but because I wanted to know the limit of what I could do with my 2 hands. "We start locally," he said. Birth records, church records, baptism registers. Your mother's diary, if you have one. Then the county. If it's an adoption, the official route is different. Many adoptions are sealed, especially from that era. You can petition the court to unseal a record. You'll need a basis: medical necessity, inheritance dispute, or a signed release by the agency or parties involved. There's also DNA. That's been a modern way of confirming relationships without wrestling with paper ghosts. He told me, quietly and plainly, that Maggie, the name we'd give this unknown child for now, could be anywhere. He said the law will treat an adopted child the same as a biological child for inheritance in most states. But whether that would matter for what I wanted to do was another question altogether. You should know, he said, that if someone shows up and claims kin, they have to prove it. DNA is persuasive. Records and witnesses help. Courts do not like to decide family based on feelings alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photograph had opened a small window into a past that was not mine alone, but had been decided for me by people who are dead. When the words "for the child we couldn't keep" echoed in my head, I felt something close to a sting, not for a loss I had known, but for the sense that my family had kept a ledger where one column was kept from sight. Daniel and I started reasonably. I made a list: attic, album, diary box, church closet, Aunt Beatrice's recipes. She'd kept notes for pot roast and baptisms, county clerk's office, old hospital ledgers. We called the parish. The church secretary, a woman with a laugh and a soft voice, came by with a file. "We have baptisms scanned back to the 30s, she said. "If this child was baptized here, we'll have a date. Sometimes there's a note in the margin, left with, fostered by, etc. There was nothing in the church record. There was a small gap in the hospital ledger from August to November 1956. A clerk's note saying records for that quarter were sent to the state archive when the hospital reorganized. The state archive was polite and slow. They asked for a written request. I wrote the request the way one writes a check, neat, with an address that looked like business. Weeks passed. People came by with memories. Mrs. Palmer across the street recalled the family taking in a neighbor child for a summer in 1957. Old Mr. Clayton remembered a summer when my mother knitted 3 small sweaters instead of 2 and asked casually, "Didn't she have a little girl in those days?" Remarkable how a town can remember what the town thinks it should. And then there was a call one afternoon. A woman with a steady voice asked to speak with me. We scheduled coffee. She arrived wearing a jacket suitable for any weather, her hair pulled back in a blunt, practical bob. She said her name was Margaret, Maggie, she said, and she was, well, she gave me the careful angle of a person who has rehearsed this first line. "I believe you may be family," she said. "I found a photograph," and she described it. "And I've been trying to find out where it came from." I showed her the photo. She touched the corner and squinted. "My mother called your mother M in letters she wrote her. She used that initial. I found one letter in a trunk, unsigned except for M, saying she had helped her in a difficult time and would always love her child. I thought, maybe..." Her voice had the faint tremor people get when someone else's past is suddenly their doorstep. We drank our coffee. She told me her story in a way that was frank and stripped of sentiment. She'd grown up in a foster arrangement, moved between houses until she was adopted at 5 by a family in the next county. She had lived most of her life in a different state, raised 3 children, worked in healthcare, and only lately had begun to wonder about that gap in her early life. The photograph had been tucked into a trunk she'd bought at auction, a trunk with other things that smelled of attic and sun. "You're sure?" I kept asking. You hope for confirmation when your life cracks in a way that matters, but you also fear the confirmation because it will change questions into obligations. She was sure she could not have sat on a trunk and invented an entire childhood. She was sure of the handwriting on a matchbox cover, of a smudge on a postmark, of a bank of small details that stacked into a pattern. She was nervous about the word adoption, which in her family had been shaped like a hush. "I'm not here for money," she said. I don't want to be a mystery anymore. I believe the way you believe an earnest voice that has been carved by long decades." Daniel believed me too. We were cautious in the house after that. If the heart of the matter had been a secret, the town was now a room with one light on. We decided to do things the right way. Have a DNA test, involve Mr. Harris, and if necessary, go through whatever formalities were required. Mr. Harris sat at my kitchen table with a folder of forms and an outline. "If Maggie's willing to take a DNA test and the test shows a first-degree relationship, that's persuasive evidence of kinship," he said. "It does not mechanically give anyone rights to property, unless there's no will or judicial determination of parentage. But from a family standpoint, it's decisive. You'll want to consider both the private and the public path. Private resolution can avoid litigation, but sometimes people come looking with their own agendas. Honesty is your best path, honesty." It sounded like the simplest thing and the most complicated. The photograph had been honest in a way a lot of documents are not. It showed faces and a date and a back written in my mother's hand. The law would ask for more, either paper showing the child's placement, a release, or a DNA match. We arranged the test. It was clinical in its way. Cotton swabs, a courier, a lab report that came back in a week with numbers and a phrase my son read aloud, and then took off his glasses and said, "Mom." The term used was not poetic. Probability of paternity shows maternity. The lab report said there was an extremely high probability that Maggie and I shared a first-degree relationship. The numbers were exact and dry. They landed like an anchor. After the result, Maggie did not immediately ask for anything. She sat with her hands folded, watching the light on the table. "This is what I hoped," she said. "Not to claim anything, but to know. To say, if someone asks my name, I have roots." Daniel and I looked at one another the way family does when there is a current to be crossed. He reached across the table and took my hand. "We'll do this carefully," he said. "We'll get the facts. We'll talk with Arthur. We'll be fair." And that was where part one had to end. With the photograph folded back in my palm, the attic quiet once more, and a woman in my kitchen who claimed a paper trail and a memory. The town would talk. That is part of small places. But inside my house there was a different noise. The sound of procedure, of forms being signed, of a lawyer outlining options in the soft, unemotional voice of someone who knows the difference between feeling and statute. We were beginning to gather the records that matter. Hospital logs, church notes, old letters, and a DNA report that, in its numerical sternness, had made what had been an oddity into a fact to be handled. The question no longer was only what had happened long ago. It was what we would do next. And the truth in this case was practical and slow. There were legal steps, medical reports, a will to check, and a town that would have opinions. None of it would be dramatic, but everything about it would change the way people sat down to Sunday dinner. When the DNA results came back, the numbers didn't lie. Agnes Middleton and Margaret Maggie were indeed twins. It was the kind of fact you couldn't unknow once you'd seen it printed in clean serif font. Probability of first-degree relationship, 99.99%. For Agnes, the first few days were disorienting, like walking around her house and realizing the rooms weren't where she remembered. All her life, she had been an only child. She had imagined herself as the sole daughter of hard-working parents who had done the best they could with little. Now, late in life, she had to admit that her parents had made a decision, one they never told her about, to give away one of their own. At first, Agnes wanted to savor the simple wonder of it. She'd found a sister, a twin no less, She let herself hope that maybe this meant she wouldn't have to spend the rest of her years watching television alone in the evenings or cooking Sunday dinners only for Daniel. Perhaps Maggie could come to church with her or sit beside her at the quilting circle. The idea had sweetness to it, but within a week, the sweetness curdled. Maggie began asking about the house. At first, she asked casually, with the offhand tone of someone making conversation. "It's a beautiful old place," she said, looking around at the solid oak banister, the tall ceilings, the old chestnut tree out back. "I've never lived in a house that felt this permanent." Agnes nodded, a little awkward. "It's been in the family since 1948. My father bought it after the war. He and my mother worked themselves ragged to pay it off. I've kept it up." "You've done well," Maggie said, running her hand along the dining room table. "But Agnes, if we're sisters, twins even, doesn't that mean this was always mine too?" Agnes felt the air leave her lungs. "What do you mean, yours too?" "You were adopted. You had a family." "Families are complicated," Maggie said smoothly. "But by blood, this is mine as much as it's yours." "Don't you think?" Agnes didn't answer. Not then. 2 days later, Maggie returned, this time with Linda, Daniel's wife, in tow. Linda had always been polite to Agnes, but Agnes knew the kind of woman she was, practical, sharp-eyed, and quietly ambitious. The moment Agnes saw the two women step through her door together, she felt the tension coil in her chest. They didn't waste time. "Agnes," Linda said, as if she were speaking to a client at her office, "you have to realize the situation. The law is clear in many states. Adopted children, if they're proven biological, can make claims in inheritance. Maggie has every right. This is my home," Agnes said firmly. "I've lived here my entire life. Daniel grew up here. It isn't a piece of land on paper. It's our life." Maggie's eyes glittered. "No one's saying you have to leave, Agnes, not now. But someday when you're gone, don't you think it's fair that it comes to both sides of the family? Half to Daniel, half to me?" Agnes's hands trembled slightly on the edge of her chair. She steadied them. "Fair? You think it's fair to show up at nearly 80 years old, with a life lived elsewhere, and demand half of mine?" Maggie's voice was cool. "I didn't choose to be given away. I didn't choose adoption. Why should I lose what was mine by birth? I want what's rightfully mine." That night, Daniel came by alone. He looked weary, older than his years. "Mom," he said quietly, "Linda's been talking to Maggie. She thinks Maggie has a case. And if she pushes it, it could get ugly. Legally." Agnes turned to the window. The chestnut tree swayed gently in the evening wind. She thought of her father's hands, rough from factory work, laying the first bricks of the patio. She thought of her mother hanging sheets on the line. This was no mere asset. It was memory, sweat, sacrifice. "Do you think she deserves it?" Agnes asked him, her voice almost breaking. Daniel hesitated. "I think she's family. But I also think you're right. She didn't live this life. She didn't care for Grandma when she was dying. She wasn't here when Dad left us too soon. She didn't keep this place standing when the roof leaked or the taxes came due." "You did, Mom. Only you," Agnes nodded. That night she made a decision. Mr. Harris returned to the house the next morning. Agnes explained everything. Maggie's claims, Linda's persuasion, her own fear that when she passed, the law might tangle everything up and Daniel could lose the very roof over his head. "Agnes," Harris said calmly, "you have options. You're of sound mind. You can make a will. You can make it clear. In this state, you're free to leave your property to whomever you choose. Maggie may contest it, but without decades of proof that you acknowledged her as an heir, her claim would be weak, especially if you make your wishes explicit now." "I want it explicit," Agnes said. "I don't want a court deciding who gets my dining room table. I don't want Daniel fighting with a woman he barely knows. And I don't want Linda thinking she can outmaneuver me with technicalities." Harris nodded. "Then we draft a will, ironclad. The days that followed were tense. Maggie called often, pressing the issue with a smile that never reached her eyes. "I'm not trying to take anything from you, Agnes," she said sweetly over coffee. "But you have to admit, it would be right for me to have a share. We're twins. Our parents cheated me out of it once. Don't cheat me out of it again." Agnes stared at her across the table. In that moment, she saw clearly. Maggie had no interest in the shared memories they might build, no desire for sisterhood. Her return was about property, not love. She wasn't here to heal the past. She was here to profit from it. Agnes set her cup down. Her voice was steady. "Maggie, you may be my blood, but you are not my sister. Sisters care for each other. Sisters don't show up only when there's an estate to claim." Maggie's expression hardened. "You'll regret saying that." "No," Agnes said quietly. "I'll regret believing otherwise." By the time Thanksgiving came around, the house was quieter. Daniel visited, but Linda stayed away. Maggie sent a letter through a lawyer, suggesting amicable division of property. Agnes gave the letter to Mr. Harris without opening it. Her will was signed the next week. Every page was witnessed, every clause airtight. She left the house and all her property to Daniel, with one stipulation. He was to maintain the chestnut tree and donate a small portion of the farm rent each year to the community food pantry. Maggie was not mentioned by name. Only one line acknowledged her existence. "No property, money, or asset of mine shall pass to Margaret Middleton or any heir or assign of hers, for she was never a part of the life built within these walls." That night, Agnes sat in her living room, the fire low in the hearth, the photograph of 3 children on the summer lawn resting on her lap. She touched the face of the girl she'd never known. "Maybe you were my sister once," she whispered. "But you're not now. Blood makes relatives. Love makes family. And you chose greed over love." The photograph, yellowed at the edges, seemed to look back at her, and for the first time since she'd found it, Agnes felt not confusion but certainty. She had protected her home. She had protected her son. And she had made sure that no one, not even a long-lost twin with hungry eyes, would take it from them. The letter came on a Monday morning, delivered by a courier who stood stiffly at the porch as if he wanted no part of its contents. Agnes signed for it, the pen trembling just slightly in her hand, and carried the thick envelope back into the kitchen. Daniel was already at the table, sipping his coffee, papers for his afternoon lecture spread out in front of him. He looked up when he saw the return address on the envelope. "That's from Maggie's lawyer." Agnes set it down, carefully, like a piece of spoiled meat. "I thought as much." They opened it together. The language was precise, all italics and numbered sections. "Our client, Margaret Middleton, hereafter referred to as petitioner, asserts her right to claim an equal share of the estate of Agnes Middleton, on the grounds of biological kinship as proven by DNA analysis." Daniel read on, his jaw tightening. "Should the respondent's current testamentary documents exclude petitioner, she reserves the right to challenge such documents in probate court as contrary to natural justice and equitable distribution of family property." By the time he finished, the coffee had gone cold. Agnes stared at the words, then folded the letter neatly and slid it back into the envelope. "She's not even waiting for me to die," she said quietly. Daniel reached across the table and covered her hand. "She's bluffing. These cases don't hold water if the will is valid. Arthur said that. You're free to leave your property to whomever you choose." Agnes nodded, but in her chest there was still that old ache, not of fear, but of betrayal sharpened into something harder. A woman who shared her blood had looked at her home and seen only numbers, bricks, and acres. Mr. Harris confirmed it that afternoon. "It's posturing," he said, adjusting his glasses. "She can file in probate after your passing, yes. But unless she can prove you were incompetent or coerced, the will stands. Courts in this state don't force heirs to share simply because of DNA. The law respects intent. And Agnes, Your intent is clear. Then let her bluster, Agnes said. She'll get nothing. Harris looked at her a moment, then added, You should prepare for ugliness anyway. These disputes rarely stay on paper. She may try to pressure Daniel. She may use Linda to stir things up. It won't be pleasant. Agnes gave a dry smile. Life rarely is. The ugliness arrived sooner than she expected. On Thanksgiving Sunday, Maggie showed up unannounced. She wore a smart coat, carried a leather handbag, and walked into the house as if she owned it. Linda followed behind her, eyes bright with something that looked too close to triumph. Agnes, Maggie began, we need to have a family discussion. Daniel, you too. It's time we talked openly about what's fair. Agnes straightened in her chair. What's fair, Maggie, is that I raised this family. I paid the mortgage. I kept this home standing. You had your own life, your own family. You were not here when this house needed care. But the bloodline is the same, Maggie countered smoothly. The law recognizes that. If you refuse to divide this property, I'll be forced to pursue it legally. Linda chimed in. She's right, Agnes. Why make this harder than it needs to be? Just amend the will, give her half. That way there won't be a fight later. Think about the stress you'll spare Daniel. Daniel stood, his face darkening. Enough. This is Mom's decision. And I'll back her. Back her? Maggie's voice was sharp now. You mean cut me out entirely? Do you think that will hold up in court? A twin excluded after DNA proves the relation? Judges don't like injustice. Agnes's voice was calm but carried steel. The law doesn't deal in sentiment, Maggie. It deals in documents, and my documents are clear. You are not entitled to one brick of this house. For a moment, silence thickened the room. Then Maggie's face hardened. If that's how you want it, I'll see you in court. She turned on her heel and left, Linda trailing in her wake. Daniel exhaled slowly. Mom, are you all right? Agnes leaned back in her chair. I've never been clearer, weeks passed. Maggie filed her petition with the probate court. The town buzzed with talk. Small towns always do. Whispers at the diner, raised brows at church. Did you hear Agnes Middleton's got a secret twin? And now they're fighting over the house? Agnes ignored most of it, though she felt the sting of pitying glances. Court proceedings began. Agnes, frail in appearance but sharp in mind, testified calmly. She explained her life in that house, the decades of labor, the repairs, the taxes, the memories. She spoke of Daniel's care, of how he had been by her side. Maggie testified too. She spoke of unfairness, of being robbed of her birthright, of a childhood decided without her consent. Her lawyer painted her as the victim of an old family injustice, a wrong that should now be righted by dividing property equally. But the law was not swayed by sentiment. Mr. Harris presented the will. It was clear, signed, witnessed. He emphasized Agnes's sound mind, her intent, her explicit exclusion of Maggie. He pointed out that Maggie had been legally adopted into another family, and that she had lived her life entirely apart from the Middleton household. Inheritance, Harris said firmly, is not about biology alone. It is about intent, relationship, and law. The judge listened. At the end of the day, the ruling was delivered. The will of Agnes Middleton is valid and enforceable. The petition by Margaret Middleton is denied. Maggie's face went pale, then flushed red. She gathered her papers, her lips pressed tight, and left the courtroom without looking at Agnes. Outside the courthouse, Daniel slipped his arm around his mother. It's done, he said softly. Agnes looked at the autumn sky, the courthouse steps, the people milling about. Yes, she said, it's done. But inside, she felt no gloating triumph, only a heavy, steady relief. That evening, back at the house, Agnes sat by the fire with the old photograph in her lap again. She traced the face of the little girl, her twin, who had been lost to her for decades. I wanted you to be family, she whispered. I wanted this to mean something more than greed. But you chose your path. You came for money, not love. And that means you were never really my sister. She placed the photo back in its box, closed the lid, and set it on the shelf. Then she turned to Daniel, who was quietly making tea in the kitchen. "This house," she said, "is yours when I'm gone. But more than that, remember this. Blood doesn't decide family. Loyalty does, love does. And if anyone ever tries to tell you different, show them what we lived through." Daniel nodded, his eyes glistening. "I will, Mom." Agnes leaned back, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. For the first time since she'd found the photograph, she felt at peace. She had faced the truth, faced the betrayal, and left her legacy secured. And as the night deepened, she thought of her parents, their silence, their choices. And she let the bitterness go. She could not rewrite the past, but she had written the ending herself. Her story would not be about what was taken, but about what was protected.